Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Pirate Radio live stream podcast, whatever we're calling this thing today. Before we get started, I have the shameless plug of the Die Free Company. Go over there, buy some AR-15 parts and some other things. I think they have AK parts now and what have you. They've got all kinds of other parts. Use the code Toxic10. That will get you 10% off of your purchase. So, we have that going for us. And I am joined today by friend of the show, internet friend, Arthur in California. Are you there? Look like you might have dropped off.
No, I'm here, Rudy. Thanks for having me back.
Gotcha. I can't see your PFP, so I didn't know if you were still there or not. But anyway, yeah, thanks for coming back. And so on this episode, I actually, neither of us actually know the number of shows we've done prior, but we've done a few shows. Most of them, the I guess the common theme is like the post World War II narrative and the reordering and the promise and all of the things we were told would happen and things that would last forever. Then kind of the shattering of that and what the I don't know, what would you say, the writing on the wall or the proverbial tea leaves of those things. And now we're to the immigration part of this conversation. So we're going to focus on that and kind of somewhat where it started. We never really know where these conversations are going to go. They just kind of happen the way they happen. But the Hart-Celler Immigration Act of 1964, which I think is actually known as like the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, is when it actually was put into law. So, if for those who are not aware of what that means, just a brief kind of overview, it shifted immigration policy and abolished the national origins quota system, instead prioritized family reunification and skilled labor, fundamentally altering the demographic makeup of the country. So it capped at 170,000 immigrants per year from the Eastern Hemisphere. For the first time, capped immigration from the Western Hemisphere to 120,000. And it had some major flaws. Shocker to no one, but it was two Democrats, that Hart and Celler, Philip Hart and Emmanuel Celler, are both two Democrats who launched this whole thing. And of course, was signed by a Democrat, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Completely different Democrats than we have today. I don't like to play the left first, right. You know, left is bad, right is always right. But anyway, so immigration is out of control. I don't know how we get it back. And that said, Arthur, what are your thoughts?
I know in the description we really put an emphasis on Hart-Celler, civil rights, and whatnot. But just to keep this brief, we do have to go back to the 1924 Immigration Act briefly, because for one thing, the narratives around America's immigration policies over the last 100 years, there's a theme to it that heritage Americans are cast as the villains every single time. The 1924 Act, it was cruel and it was wrong. And amazingly, to tie this back in, guess who was one of the main politicians against the 1924 Immigration Act? Oh, Emmanuel Celler again. So you look at just the time frame, the timeline of decades of continuing to push to get to Hart-Celler from there. But what's always left out in that conversation of the 1924 Immigration Act being passed is what was going on in America 20 years prior to that. What's left out is we had a president assassinated, William McKinley, by an anarchist, Polish born or American born, but from Poland initially. And you had the rise of the anarchist movement, the Galenists. There, if I recall correctly, I believe it was 1919. There was 36 mailed bombs out to politicians, judges, everywhere else. Anarchy was reigning, and that was why Theodore Roosevelt got in office after McKinley was assassinated. And he's, of course, famously known there are no hyphenated Americans. What do we see at present time? There's nothing but hyphenated Americans. Everyone has a hyphen unless your family's been here for a couple hundred years. It's amazing. And that is always left out of the story, that the narrative told 1924 Immigration Act was put in because, well, we just didn't like people. No, there were serious social upheavals going on. There were threats to the government, threats to social cohesion. It was a bit more complicated and nuanced than the cookie cutter story that we get from that. But what left from that, and also left out, is that from 1924 to 1965, what did that give America? It gave America time to breathe, time to actually assimilate. The It was even called, the Americanization process. There were expectations within the majority society that we had, our traditions, our customs, how things went. And I really feel that we have to be intellectually honest about where we're at right now and how, the myth of a multicultural, diverse, and, just mixed up society as it is not all positives at all whatsoever. And there are serious clashes going on between, different traditions, different cultures. It's pretty much we have tribalism, and it seems everyone except for Heritage America, most of them seem not to understand that. They're not seeing how identity politics is politics now, and it's not good right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the hyphenated Americans, the great Teddy Roosevelt speech to the I think it was the Knights of Columbus. Just a fantastic speech that should be etched in the soul of every heritage American, every God fearing, red blooded, hot dog eating, apple pie eating, American out there. Um, the hyphenated American is a really big deal, and as you pointed out, everyone now is a hyphenated American. You're not black, you're African American, which to me is like one of the most racist comments that you can say to a heritage American who just happens to have darker skin and be black, to call them an African American. So you're saying that they're not Americans, which is like you're something else. You're always othered. And I kind of my thought was is that you're not othered, you're just an American. Here in Oklahoma, we have what they want to call Native Americans. Well, myself and yourself, Arthur, are Native Americans. I don't know your family's history, but my family's history goes back on one side to the first immigrant here from Ireland, fought in the Civil War, fought on the northern side. And the other side goes back to like the Hatfields and McCoys. We were the Hatfields. So, I mean, that's heritage Americans, that's Native Americans. I call them all American Indians. They do prefer to be called Indians, but it's all this like, sectioning off and this voting block and this and that, and creating those like different voting blocks, I guess, and these different little coalitions. You smash the board into 1,000 pieces, and then you can cobble together some sort of little like, hyphenated coalition or something like that. It's very like on the one hand, you'll have people that have no problem with it and they'll use that horrific term called melting pot. And then those same people who are either they're experiencing cognitive dissonance or they're just completely like intellectually dishonest will then talk about the Muslims and the Muslim problem, and then lump, every Muslim is just a jihadi waiting for the time to clack off an IED or a vest or something like that and kill a whole bunch of Americans. And it's like, well, if you truly believe that there's some sort of Muslim problem, shouldn't we, like, I don't know, try to address the rise of Muslims in the United States? Like if we go back to the 1920s, and that's a great point about the anarchists that are happening, and it's kind of the rise of, you would have to be a blind man if you're if you're a federal politician or a learned man that to the revolutions and the coups that are taking place in Europe in the 19th century into the 20th century. And those are led by young, kind of anarchists, young people with mailing bombs around. But I would wonder how many Muslims were in the United States in the 1920s. Maybe a few. I doubt there were very many. And so this whole thing is like you go from the 1920s, like what was it, 24 to 64, 65, and you have that breathing period of how to figure it out. And we think we figured it out. But the big event happens in between there of World War II. We come out the victor, obviously the victor. We had all the spoils. We were now running the world, slightly opposed on the other side by the Soviet Union. And now we have this like almost kind of obligation is what it feels like at the if you read some of the stuff at the time, especially from like Celler. And you know Philip Hart looks like just a patsy in this whole thing. I didn't have enough time to do a whole lot of research in it, but he looks like just kind of a patsy in the whole deal. But after World War II, our immigration obviously begins to go haywire, and it just seems like another failure of the post World War II narrative um, in America. So, yeah,
Yeah, and going back to the early 20th century, our only kind of perspective on it is 9/11. Getting attacked on U.S. soil. Of course, we had
sure,
the Oklahoma City bombing. Domestic terrorism. We had the World Trade Center bombing in '93. But by and large, we've been fairly unscathed for the last about 20, 30 years. But in that early period, not only the mail bombings, but there were coordinated bombings on Wall Street in 1920. There were bombings from anarchists trying to blow up, once again, like I said, blow up the judges. One attorney general walked out, the bomber had blown himself up, and there's an arm right there on his doorstep. Like he just barely just missed it because the guy blew himself up. So you just got to kind of
right.
put yourself into that time frame of why the 1924 Immigration Act came along and came to be. It was protectionism of what America was, what the culture was, what was going on there. And further to that point, though, is I'm glad you brought up the Muslims. In 1950, for example, there were 20 mosques in America. 20. That's it. There was nearly 200,000 churches with 350,000 congregations, Christian churches. And once again, back to that narrative of, well, America, it's never been a Christian nation. Okay, no,
Shit,
we can all look at stats. We can look at the numbers. We
right.
can remember our own upbringing. I mean, myself, I'm in my 40s, and I can still remember, America of even just, 1990, 1994. I was a kid, but this is very different, and things are changing very fast. And to continuously tell us that everything's going to turn out all right, or that it's all just positives, no, it's not. It's not. When you talk
No,
about, we have our Somali community, we have this community, that community, and the voting blocks line up on those grounds. That's where we're at right now.
and that to me, that is a real problem. Like this. I did make a note here because you mentioned the World Trade Center and Oklahoma City. There's a potential for those of you who weren't in the pre-show, which is just me and Arthur. I mentioned to him that I'm doing an Oklahoma City bombing, like deep dive into the history of it, and just there's a lot of meat on that bone and a lot of things we weren't told. But it's going to take a while to get there. But there is a potential that Oklahoma City and the World Trade Center are somewhat linked. They're linked in a truck bombing. They might be linked between Terry Nichols and Ramzi Youssef being in the Philippines at approximately the same time. There's an overlap there, but I've yet to kind of put my finger on the pulse of that whole thing. But anyway, I digress. Going back to the anarchy, the anarchists, so 1920 to about 1935, I would say. Let's just say 1920 to 1940. So before we get into World War II. So you're talking about a 20-year period where you have Russia now are Bolshevik communists. Not only are they Bolshevik communists, but Lenin dies. Trotsky is ostracized. He's ousted. He ends up in Mexico. And Joseph Stalin takes over the Soviet Union and begins the Holodomor, the Red Terror, the purges, all of those things. You have on the flip side here in the United States, not only do you have the anarchist movement, it's basically a revolutionary movement. They're trying to change the government completely. And with that sea change that's happening in Russia, now becoming the Soviet Union, the Soviet, republic, Soviet socialist republics. Um, you have those folks here in the United States seeing the writing on the wall, but you also have a whole bunch of people in the United States saying that, oh no, Stalin and the Bolsheviks and Lenin prior, they're creating utopia. They're running cover for this whole thing. They're saying it how great it is. Everyone has, to each their needs, to each their wants, their needs, whatever the hell the stupid communist line is, that's a lie. But the cat's not out of the bag at that point. And for, I've talked about this before about what the Bolsheviks really meant was this was going to be a worldwide revolution, a worldwide workers' revolution. It was going to start in Russia. It was going to then domino into a weakened Germany after World War One, which almost happened. And the dominoes were just going to continue to fall. They had their tentacles in the UK. There are very notable, prominent folks in the UK at the time who were vehemently pro-communist. They didn't hide it. You had it here. It was a little more underground, but not as underground as everyone thinks. It was out in the open. The Emma Goldbergs of the world, a very historical character in all of this, who later turned on the whole thing after getting to visit. But if you're in the United States at the time, you need to definitely not be importing anyone basically from Europe at the time, but definitely you don't want to be importing people that are third worlders, if you will, that are not going to contribute to this society. They're not going to contribute to this culture. They're not going to be kind of a cultural backstop, if you will, to what the United States and America are. You want someone who's going to buy into that system if you're going to allow them in at all. And it's kind of historically it made sense. And then, just to give my little like personal touch about my upbringing, the first 8-10 years of my life was in the north side of Tulsa, which is like the quote unquote poor side of Tulsa, if you will. But back when I was going to school and growing up there, seemed just more like middle class, maybe lower middle class, depending on the house. But I remember going to, coincidentally enough, I went to McKinley Elementary, which is named after William McKinley. And it was black and white. I don't remember kind of if there was somewhat of a ratio. I would assume, and you try to think back, there were more white people than black people, more white kids than black kids. But it wasn't, it was just, it was, and it was white and black. What I pointed out to a coworker of mine earlier this week was zero Mexican, no Hispanic, none. And this guy that I was talking to is like 24 years old. Blew his mind that there were zero Hispanics in that school whatsoever. None. So, like, when I'm talking about immigration, I won't put words into Arthur's mouth. He's more than capable of telling you what he thinks and how he feels, probably way more articulate than I am. But when I talk about immigration, I'm talking about on our board. Like, I don't want Canadians here either because they're not Americans. Like, I would prefer there's a reason there's a call for a wall on the southern border, not the northern border. I want them both walled off personally, especially with Canada's recent behavior. But this idea that you can just allow people to come here, stay here, and then, then do what? You hear this narrative of, well, they do the jobs Americans won't do. That's not true. They do the jobs that Americans are not going to do for that kind of wage. And in my personal experience, I've worked a few trade jobs in the past. The people that take advantage, or the people that are taken advantage of the most, are folks who are here, illegally, because they have no way. They can't go to the cops and say, or the labor commission or whomever, and say, hey, this guy's not paying me minimum wage or this or that, or, OSHA's not involved. If you get hurt as a illegal immigrant here, you don't work here anymore and you have no way to do anything, and you're not subjected to the protections of our laws. So we can talk about how there are positives and there are some negatives too. The positives tend to be like on the surface. okay, you came here legally, you're contributing to the system, whatever the hell that means at this point. Um, but then there's the negative side of it. You came here, you have no skills. You notice one of the things of Hart-Celler was people with skills and, familial connections, which I think is kind of that, like, that was the back door, but it was skilled workers, which that plays into the H-1B visa program, which talks about, educated kind of like the bachelor's and master's degree skilled workers, the IT, the tech versus a guy swinging a hammer. Both of those things, you just bring these people over here. You don't force them to buy into the system. In essence, the system helps them out completely. In some instances, gives them, a debit card, a place to live, and all of these things. Whereas if you're, to your point about, it's always about like shitting on the heritage American, I don't, as an American, I don't expect any sort of like handout or help unless it's, dire straits over here. But why would any resource be diverted to someone who showed up 10 minutes ago? I don't care if they're from Canada, Mexico, India, wherever, Somalia. You're not entitled to anything. So to your point, Arthur, it's like, hey, heritage American or heritage British person, F you. And if you say anything about it, there might be some repercussions for that, um, of varying degrees. And if we're talking about the UK, it's quite severe from what I understand at this point. But yeah,
Well, and my thing on this is going back to, we have to be intellectually honest about this. That there, the pushback on, the term heritage American, it's amazing to me, because a lot of people are like, well, why is that coming out now? And it's going, well, I started seeing what my identity is in this country when it started getting attacked over and over and over. And like Lenin said, he described useful idiots, those in the Western world voicing sympathy for the Soviet Union in the early, the early 20th century.
right.
A famous example for that is Walter Duranty, the Moscow correspondent for the New York Times, that
A
was just
horrible person.
putting, yeah, I mean, he was putting out dispatches, conditions are bad, but there is no famine. But to put it brutally, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. And that journalist of, the famed Gray Lady got the Pulitzer Prize in 1932. And even after finding out that he was an entire fraud, that he was lying, even the New York Times to this day, they haven't, given back the prize or something. They do the word salad, saying, "Well, that's up to the Pulitzer group to take it back. It's not up to us." It's like, you can't even just acknowledge that they're the lies over and over. And just to, not a pushback on what you're talking about with the economics, but I'm noticing that I'm not going to utilize the framing of the opposition here with the economics. Our initials are USA, not GDP. And even that's a misnomer in itself
Yes.
when they talk about jobs Americans won't do. When you see, I mean, headlines just about every other day of, oh, CEO of T-Mobile laid off 6,000 Americans, but they're bringing in 2,500 H-1Bs.
Right.
Okay. You're telling me that we did not have the American intellectual know-how to do these jobs? You'll see an article come out saying how college graduates are seeing, difficult job market. And then the very next day, they talk about how hot the economy is and how many more jobs we made. We get told one narrative of, we need more people here, but then the next narrative is, AI is going to get rid of 40% of all jobs, and it's going to do all these utopian, wonderful things. And oh, by the way, we need all of Utah's water for this next data center. And it's just that yin and yang, that they're not adding up, and it's just not making sense. And as we talked before, it's not just in America. It's every Western nation that these things being said. What was the gentleman's name? Novak, was it
Yes,
Henry?
Henry Novak.
Yeah,
I think it's
before
Nowak. Henry
Nowak.
Nowak.
But just today, Lemmy, one of the politicians, comes out and says, "Well, the police will need to deal differently depending on ethnicities. They'll treat them differently." And you're going, you're just saying it out loud, that there is a 16-tier justice system depending on who you are. That's insane. that this is not egalitarian. This is not equality in any sense. And to segue into Hart-Celler and the Civil Rights Act, the collusion of those two being passed could not have been worse, really. The author Christopher Caldwell, Age of Entitlement, where he talks about how the Civil Rights Act of '65 essentially created a second constitution, and it metastasized into affirmative
Right.
action, disparate impact. But what happened with that
Right.
is, okay, you were saying this was supposed to be for, the latest term is, ADOS, American descendants of slavery or whatever. Yeah, segregation was bad. We got to do all this. But once it just pretty much applied to 90% of the world, that as soon as they touch our magical shores, the magic dirt, that they're a protected minority, that they're entitled to all of these things, how is that exactly supposed to work? Another good book was, it's called Making Hispanics in 2014, and it was published by a professor at Berkeley. And what I noticed when I read it was kind of interesting. I think we could call it the pre-woke period, 2014. It was already kind of etching in, but
Right.
it was refreshing how honest she was about, after the Civil Rights Act got passed, and then the minority rights starts up. Well, everybody had to jump in on that. So all of a sudden, you didn't have Chicanos, you didn't have Puerto Ricans, you didn't have the uh, different groups. No, no, it's all Hispanic, it's all Latinos, because then it could be grouped into the the government gimmies, essentially.
Right.
And you
And
can't have a
that's
civilization.
also right, and that's also where you get like the Liz Warren's claiming that she's Native American on her college application. Like, they will talk about this as that it's some sort of like we have to have this because the white devil, the heritage American, is intrinsically like racist. And it's like, okay, well, here's the thing, and a problem with that is that if we were intrinsically, inherently, systematically, or systemically racist, then Liz Warren's not checking the box for Native American on her college application. She would say, I'm fucking white because I'm going to use my white privilege to go to this university of the University of Texas at Austin. That's where she did this at. So it just blows up the complete narrative that we're some sort of like just mouth breathing racists that just want all the immigrants gone. Like it's not even that. It's just being completely pushed aside, cast aside. Into the Henry Nowak thing. For those who basically not been online, I guess, and God bless you. Henry Nowak was stabbed 5 times with a quote ceremonial knife by a Sikh, I believe, in what was it? I believe it was London. Um, the stabber, the perpetrator, and his brother then called the police and said that Nowak had assaulted them because of their Sikhness. My word, not theirs. And then the cops basically arrested him as he bled to death and said, "I can't breathe. I've been stabbed. I can't breathe." And they basically said, "No, you haven't. You're a racist. Put your hands behind your back." And he bled to death as they told him he was a liar because they had to take the word of the Sikhs, and because they have a two-tier justice system at the very least, which again, to allude to something that's not here, and it's probably not the greatest way to podcast, but I I sent it over to Arthur earlier this week. Tucker Carlson had a guy named Richard Wright on his podcast, which none of the crazed like Zionist folks will listen to because I don't think he mentioned Israel one time. So when he has a great podcast like this, where he has a guy named Richard Wright on there who's like the most base son of a bitch I've heard in a long time, especially from the UK, talking about the system has completely failed. And not only is the system completely failed and is crumbling and is coming apart at the seams, but the promise of the system, and this is the promise of Western civilization itself and liberal democracy, is completely gone. He gets into talking about, or they do, I don't remember who brings it up, but they start talking about the social contract. And the social contract, I said this a few years ago. I think I actually wrote it and put it on Substack that said the social contract is dead. And, for that's another term that's gotten kind of bastardized over the years. I remember growing up thinking that the social contract would have been like between me and you, Arthur, as citizens. We're both going to do good to each other. It's kind of the golden rule of like a civilization: do unto others as they would do unto you, kind of thing. When really, in essence, the social contract is between us, the governed, and the people governing us. We allow a few kind of, not necessarily restrictions, but we're willing to kind of give up complete and utter, just straight liberty for rule of law and order and safety. I don't even want to say safety, just more of like
Well,
security, I guess is the better word. But to that point, I'll turn it back over to you. It completely, we're seeing the promise of liberal democracy, and what it actually is just dying in front of us. And unfortunately, Mr. Nowak was that like physical manifestation. Go ahead.
well, yeah, just looking down the comments, Clowntown Chronicle says the mom also hid the weapon. And
Correct.
that has to be pointed out. The entire family got together to hide this at first. And that's because what can't be said out loud, it seems at times, is that Western nations are by and large for Westerners. It is Western ways. But you
Correct.
have these groups coming in that it is such extreme nepotism, extreme in-group preference. And I believe the phrase is that the the Indian way of you're never wrong, essentially. Like even if you are wrong, you never even admit it, or you don't do that. And you saw that in the courtroom. It was amazing how they came out with of course, a boilerplate statement written up by some lawyer or some group of, we're very sorry for the loss of the family for the young gentleman. But in the
Sure.
courtroom after he was convicted, they were screaming invectives at the dead kid's family, essentially calling them all racist because that's the most horrible thing in the world, and it makes people uncomfortable. But we have to understand that we are Western nations, we are Westerners. Pat Buchanan himself, which if you haven't read his books and if you don't know who that is, you need to learn. You need to learn. But in 2011, one of a great book that he came out, "Suicide of a Superpower." He gets fired from MSNBC because one chapter talked about the end of white America, and the MSNBC president specifically stated the book contained ideas that weren't appropriate for the national dialogue, much less on MSNBC. That was only 15 short years ago, Rudy. And you and I and the listeners listening right now, we're having these conversations. It is a part of the national dialogue. There is a recognition that the West, by and large, is European peoples. That's what it is. Our
Yep.
traditions, even back to that 1924 Immigration Act, one of the politicians discussed how the institutions that we have and everything else was cultivated over centuries of England, Anglo Saxons, everything else, that where it came from. And I remember one of the most ridiculous
Right.
things during, I guess, the peak of wokeness, which, besides opinions of him, not very high, but Mike Pence talked somewhere in Trump's first term, and I believe it was at a convention for the Sheriff's National Association or whatever. And he talked about how proud he was of our Anglo Saxon heritage. And it was attacked mercilessly in the media of how racist that is to call something Anglo-Saxon. And it's like, well, yeah, the sheriffs, that job, what they do, that started from our traditions going back to England. And back to you're talking about ancestry and heritage. I got really interested in that in the early 2000s. My own family, I knew that we'd been here a while, but finding out that on my father's side we've been in this nation since the 1600s. On my mother's side, the 1700s easily. We've all seen the online thing about, are you on the Civil War registry? Well, yes, yes, my family is. And it's even a misnomer to say nation of immigrants. That's new.
Right.
That didn't start up until the late 50s, early 60s. And that was put in place. That was another narrative to say that no, you didn't build this. You came here. We're all immigrants. And it's no, we're not. An immigrant comes to an established nation. And even the first people coming over here, the first colonies, those were colonists. They were settlers. They were pioneers. And it's not shameful, and it is not wrong to be proud of that, of what we built. Our ancestors were not evil. This misnomer of, well, the only people in the world who've done something wrong is people of Western descent. Why don't you flip through the history pages a little bit more? Human nature
Right.
does not age. It hasn't aged since thousands of years ago. I mean, Rudy, you know this as well as I do. This the narrative of the noble savage, and me being from
God.
Texas originally, you from Oklahoma. Yeah, there's plenty of evidence out there. There's plenty of written documentation of the Indian depredations, and even in itself to just kind of glob it together, Native American, like that's ridiculous. There was over
Right.
2,000 plus recognized tribes. You had Caddos, Comanches, Apache, Chippewa, and every single one of those groups had different traditions, histories, cultures. I mean, the Caddos, for instance, there in East Texas, they
Gods.
were fishermen, you know, and to really just to demonize such figures as the Texas Rangers nowadays, and what happened back then, it's one of the most mind-blowing things to me of people who just eat it up and say, yeah, you're right, yeah, we're horrible evil people. For some reason, everyone in the world tries to get into our nations and then tell us how to run them, but that's wrong. And we're getting to that point where we're still comfortable, but at the same time, 40 trillion in debt, the inflation out of reach. There's going to be coming some loggerhead moments here, and it's not what I want to see, but there's going to have to be changes.
Well, let's focus on, well, not focus on, but I'm going to bring that kind of the modern day thing of, we did an episode, uh, a few months ago. Um, the topic was, will conservatives govern? And the answer is fucking no, they won't. Because at that time, ICE was active. They were, doing the raids, doing the deporting. It's an 80-20 issue of deportations. Everybody knew it was going to get a little murky there. It was going to get a little tough. I didn't think, ICE going into Minnesota and doing what they did and just, running headlong into it and just, being super physical about it. Not the tactic that I would use. Didn't seem to work out. But instead of a pivot, it was just like, well, let's just go home. Let's not do that anymore. It's just such a bad look. Instead, we're going to go, do things overseas, which is not an 80-20 issue. It might be a 20-80 issue. And it is a horrific miscalculation, is what I'll at least call it, because I don't have any more information than just what I can see and things I can hear and read and on all of that. And I'm not going to try to read deeper into it. But the idea that you took one, it's somewhat analogous to like the Epstein files. You run on this thing, you get elected, and you kind of try it, and then you just like back off of it. The idea that, the current administration is in there because you're running off the platform of tens of millions of illegal immigrants flooded into this nation under Joe Biden's watch. And the person I'm running against, Kamala Harris, was the border czar, and she did nothing to stop it. Says there's no problem. There's nothing she would change that Joe Biden did. So there you have it. Now you're in office. You have a mandate, which I really hate that term because, there's a lot of squishes there. But regardless, you've won the popular vote. You have this coalition. You have the power of the people, if you will, to go do this thing. You shut down the border. Perfect. Great. Good job. The border basically is done. Okay. Good. There is no talk of stopping remittances, taxing remittances. There is no rating of large scale operations in like agriculture. And you do see these rating of small like businesses of 30 and 50 people. I think one happened today where they raided like a machine shop or something like that and arrested 40 people. And it's like, I think we've talked about this before, about the Cato Institute and the Koch brothers. Like, you can, for those of you listening who are fans of the Cato Institute, foreign policy, okay, got some decent guys over there right now. But if you're talking about domestic policy and immigration at the Cato Institute, it's a fucking dumpster fire. It is complete and utter propaganda, and it's where you're going to hear the talking point of, well, immigrants commit crimes at a lesser rate than Americans, native born Americans, in some stupid term like that, instead of saying heritage Americans. So it's like you're employing these guys to completely sell themselves out, at the behest of the biggest businesses in the world. And, I don't know that either of the Koch brothers is still alive. I think we looked this up last time. But either way, I know one of them's since passed on. But you're
Yeah.
talking about guys that have completely set policy and apparently have gotten to the administration and said, hey, bud, and they're not alone in this, but, I don't know that Monsanto has a think tank in Washington D.C. or New York, wherever it is, running cover for them and running propaganda every single day about the virtues of immigration, and how we must have these people because it's jobs Americans won't do. And so you see these like people on the left now jumping in saying, oh, see what Cato says? It's your own publication. And that's kind of the hoodwink of the whole thing. And you have these quote unquote conservatives like Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, the conservative who bought fucking kids. I will never not take the chance to point that out. Talking about, well, the virtues of like H-1B visas, and oh no, there's no way that an American could do the job of running a factory that builds batteries. It's like, we don't build fucking batteries. Like, what are we talking about here? And so you have an administration that could have just, you could attack it every angle, from physically grabbing someone and deporting them to undermining their ability to operate in this country. If we want to talk about like military kind of terms, there's any number of things that you could have done. Self deportation would have been the best way, and we've gotten none of it to this point.
One thing for me that it gets me is it's kind of the double side of the coin for technology. Yes, it's the internet and everything else, online, whatnot, social media. It's brought a lot of ills, but I do have
Sure.
to say that it's also brought a lot more information to light for people. You can look it up. If you have an AI model that's honest, it'll tell you, by and large, what actually happened. And what amazes me is we still live under these narratives of politicians saying, well, it's just so hard to get, some immigration legislation in there. No, you can look it up. Over the last 100 years, they've basically passed an immigration law of one kind or another about every 2 years nearly. I mean, just
Right.
looking through it, going back to what you're talking about with the post World War II consensus, it kicks it off. 1948, Displaced Persons Act. 1950, Lodge Philbin Act. 52, the Immigration Nationality Act, McCarran Walter. You know, Refugee Relief Act of 53, and it just goes on and on and on. Yes, legislation can be passed. It's just not passed. But when it is passed, say, for example, the Hart-Celler Act, you're told things such as the signing, which was very famously signed there at the Statue of Liberty, right next to that wonderful poem that was tacked on, 14 years after it came there, bring me your poor, tired, etc. But President
By a
Lyndon B.
kid.
Johnson, huh?
I think it was written by a kid.
No, it was Emma Lazarus. It's a
Either way, childish
Russian,
writing. Sorry.
but she was, well, yeah, but she was talking about bring more Russians here, essentially, from the pogroms and whatnot. But Lyndon B. Johnson himself says this bill that we signed today is not a revolutionary bill. It does not affect the lives of millions. It will not reshape the structure of our daily lives. And promises after promises. Senator Ted Kennedy, the Kennebunk swim team guy, the bill will not flood our cities with immigrants. It will not upset the ethnic mix of our society. It will not relax the standards of admission. Contrary to the charges in some quarters, this bill will not inundate America with immigrants from any one country or area or the most populated and economically deprived nations of Africa and Asia. Yeah, how'd that work out?
Right. Right. Not only that, but to take that back to tie it back into like the oh damn, the Civil Rights Act. Excuse me, brain fart. Um, yes, this immigration has affected white America to an extent. Who it really has destroyed is black America. Because just, out in California, I it took me a while to realize this, but if you talk about, I've never been to California, is one of the reasons, but when you look at like pop culture, Boys in the Hood, you know what California, unfortunately, some of what California was known for was the Bloods and the Crips. Whether it's Colors, Boys in the Hood, there's any number of like movies that kind of portray this, probably somewhat accurately, also probably somewhat inaccurately. It's Hollywood. It is what it is. But those neighborhoods, from what I understand now, are completely Hispanic. The black people have been displaced. And when you're talking about like, you know, these minorities, in essence, whether they're naturally born here or they're imported here, they're going to clash because white America, by and large, to this point, has been fine. Black America has not been fine. Their neighborhoods have been destroyed. They've been taken over. They've been pushed out. Now, we can blame the university structure is another example. Like, affirmative action, so much of this is like good intentions, at least on the surface. So if we're going to have affirmative action, we're going to have, a lot more black children, teenagers that are able to go to colleges that otherwise may have been outside their grasp because for whatever reason, fair enough. It never worked out for black America that they got the preferential treatment. By and large, it was like women, a lot of white women. It was obviously the Asian community kicking ass so much that they became white in the eyes of, university administrations the admittance office. It never really worked out for the black Americans who are also heritage Americans here. So they have borne the brunt of most of this directly, and now it's starting to really infect and kind of affect the white population. And now the normies, if you will, are starting to notice, and now it's becoming a problem, which fair enough, better late than never. But both of those acts were, if not the same year, one after each other. Like you pointed out before, or you pointed out, whoever pointed out, that the Civil Rights Act created a parallel constitution. In essence, it kind of was the refounding of the if not the country, at least the social order. That now states are not states anymore. They can't do the things that they want to do. They're under threat of defunding, non-funding, or possibly military occupation for a time from the federal government from doing what you want to do. Now, we can point to certain things of not allowing a black child to go to a school. Seems like a bad idea. That seems like a reason to maybe get involved at the federal level to to enforce the law. Fair enough, but it went so much deeper than that it has completely. We're what, 2 generations from this, and we're seeing the fruit borne out fully. It's not like some half ripened fruit. This is fully formed fruit, and does not taste good. It does not look good, but apparently everyone has to take a bite, smile, and swallow it down, or else you're some sort of bigot, racist, xenophobe, Nazi. I don't know, but I think that's pretty interesting as well.
I mean, as you brought up, though, I mean, you got to think about it. And the best good faith argument for the Civil Rights Act of 65 and the
Sure.
other ones, the best good faith argument they take is, well, we're just trying to right some wrongs here. Is it not the biggest rug pull you can imagine from the left and from progressivism and everything else of, the Whig theory of progress that, okay, and oh, by the way, we're going to bring in 100 million more people that are going to be competing against you. We passed this bill for you because people forget. You can just go back to, say, 1950, and America was essentially, for all intentions, a black and white nation. You could have taken just about everyone that wasn't black or white, and they would
Right.
fit in the metropolitan area of Phoenix today. So this idea of melting pot, this idea of, oh well, it was always ultra diverse. No, it was not. No. And once again, going back to the best faith, good faith argument for the Civil Rights Act, like, yeah, okay, a few more opportunities. My most left wing hot take that I've said before is maybe it could have worked if it had a sundown clause and you would not have changed so dramatically the demographics of America. Maybe if it had a sundowner clause of 1995, 65 to 95, but instead you imported an entire, well, number of countries into here to compete with that. And that's not going to work. As I said earlier, when everyone practically in the world, 9 out of 10 people, they hit our shores and it's magic dirt and you're a protected minority. Oh, and by the way, now you can get specialized small business loans. And oh, hey, guess what? This Hart-Celler Act with the chain migration. Yeah, now that you got that loan and you can get that business, now you can start bringing in your brother, your cousin, a whole number of things. And it's I know you've heard the term before, Rudy, mission creep, right?
Yes.
Yes, mission creep for the listeners is, of course, you have one objective, but then things just start piling on. Well, let's do this as well, or maybe we can do that. And that's kind of essentially how you look at it. Because if you were an American in 1965, a reasonable person, you, for one, you would be just amazed that, wait, why is Watts, burning down right now? We just signed this legislation. But anyway, that's a whole another show. But you would still think,
Right.
oh, okay, yeah, fair shot for people and stuff. But then it just went from there. And as you look through the path it took from, rulings on disparate impact, heck, even into the 70s, the immigration was becoming a problem in my neck of the woods, my hometown area of East Texas. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was called Plyler versus Doe. In that case, Tyler, Texas, the school district, it had a huge influx of illegal students. And what they did is they didn't kick them all out of school. We didn't do the caricature. Oh yeah, horrible racist American job. They were blocking the doors. No, they just said, look, if you're not a citizen, if your kid's not a citizen, you need to pay because you're not paying taxes. You are not in the citizen system, so you need to pay a form of tuition or whatnot. And then that's when it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, where they our nine unelected tribal elders magically decreed that anyone in America is owed an education.
Right.
And to add to that, I've always felt a bit of a hybrid because, I'm born and raised in Texas, but I've been here in California for nearly 2 decades. I mean, I go home every year, visit and whatnot, but I find myself in a hybrid status because everyone not in California, just about, they get the perceptions, of course, from Fox News, from TV, and they're showing what's going on in LA or San Francisco. And this is a huge state. And I
Yeah.
have to actually, I have to take up for the Californians here, especially at times, because they didn't just roll over and lay down. They fought back on immigration. A great example of that is the Prop 187, passed by over 60 plus percent of Californians in the early 90s, that said, look, if you're illegal, you can't get social services. You can't just go to the ER all day long and stuff. Now, there were, of course, carve outs for, you break your leg and you're illegal. Yes, they're going to treat you. They will do life saving maneuvers, so stuff like that. But you had to prove that you needed to be here. And then that just magically, made it up to the Supreme Court of California and just got shot down. And back to your point of talking about how, Con Inc., Conservative Inc. doesn't do anything. There were no challenges, no legal challenges to that. There were no appeals. They didn't fight back on that. Stepping on toes for anyone who, worships Saint Ronald Reagan, his 1986 Immigration Act there of the amnesty. Oh, but plus we're going to have enforcement. We're going to add in more protections and whatnot. And so his defenders say, well, he didn't know. And it's like, yes, Reagan knew. Reagan had been a politician since the 60s. I really got to one day write that essay, Ronald Reagan, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it's another complex issue there. There are some things, of course, that he did that, yes, we can all say, yeah, that was a good thing, but we have to acknowledge the bad. And of course, granting amnesty, just a blanket amnesty for, I think the last estimate was almost 4 million people right there, that turned California blue. That turned it blue. They have not voted for a
Yep.
Republican since 1988. But what's still left out of that as well is that even in the 2024 election, And yes, there is plenty of corruption in the voting systems in this state. No ID. I've posted on that before, but by and large, what they say is Kamala Harris got about 9.6 million and Trump got 6.6 million. This is a, except for the coastlines, La La Land and San Fran and stuff, there's a lot of red country here. There's a lot of conservative country here. Where I live, a lot of the people, I've asked them, like, hey, where did your people come from? And more often than not, they say, well, my great grandfather came over after the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma, because I live in the Central Valley. It's a lot of farmland, it's ranches, and it's just by and large a conservative area. So it you can't just paint California in itself of, oh yeah, it's all progressive out here, all just the crazy liberals. No, it's the American Rhodesia. It's been taken over by the interests and whatnot. You can look to, the rise of the politicians, whether it's a Newsom or even Kamala Harris, and you see their pathway, and you see that it was other groups getting behind them, propping them up. That's why Kamala Harris here in the state, that's why she dropped out in 2020 before the primary even hit California, because she was not going to win the state, because she is considered the prom queen of politics. She's just been put up on the pedestal over and over and over. And so it's almost like, California is the land of illusions and Hollywood and make believe, and it is in politics as well. It's amazing. There's so many things here that can be fixed, need to be fixed, but it's a misnomer to say that Californians, they all wanted this and that they all voted for this. That old saying, well, you get what you vote for. It's like, no, there's a lot of people that don't vote for this. They don't want this. And yeah, it's pretty much occupied territory right now, essentially. And Texas in itself, I mean, I got to knock them as well. You got Hot Wheels Abbott over there promising that he's going to just keep bringing more and more different people into the state, changing up the entire cultural makeup, the social fabric of the state itself. I made a post today about how I was on a show last year, and I asked the interviewer, I said, or no, he told me, he's like, oh yeah, I've been to Texas. I said, oh, where'd you go? And he said, I went to Dallas. And I told him, I said, well, you went to Dallas. You didn't go to Texas. And all across our country now, these major metropolitan areas, they're just, you can't tell the difference hardly at all. It's a blue area, and the powers that be, the factions there, they keep a tight hold on it. And it's not good.
No, it's not. I remember my time in San Antonio. A lot of folks would say anything north of Austin is a Yankee. So, yeah, going to going to Dallas is not exactly the Texas experience. It is, anybody ever gets a chance to go to the hill country of Texas, I would say take it. It's a fantastic time, and that's more of Texas than anything. You get a broad swath, but yeah, there is one of the things that we have this beaten out of us as kids. We have this kind of preached to us of this, equality kind of message and, kind of self-esteem. I would assume we're very close to the same age. The self-esteem movement was big, at least in my part of the world, probably was preached to you as well. But the self-esteem message really is just kind of, it's terrible for kids to be preached that you're just perfect, you're fine the way that you are. But we have this kind of beaten out of us, and I wrote this down when you were talking about, the Western civilization and the Western world, and, kind of the way, like, it's okay to say that, we are better than you, like, as a culture. It's fine to understand that Western culture, broadly speaking, and American culture more directly, is better than Somalia. I'm sorry. We just are. As a people, we've done way more for other people. We have done any number of things. I don't have to defend America's track record as a country. Some of it not great, most of it very damn good. I mean, the reason we're even able to do this thing we're doing right here is because of this country and Western civilization. No one in Somalia helped this. No one in Pakistan helped this. No one in Saudi Arabia helped this. It's okay to say that we are better than you. Okay? We are. If we weren't, you wouldn't ever come here. Obviously, if you want to go live in, if you have a choice between two homes and one is really, really nice with Wi Fi, this, that, or the other, and the other is a hole in the ground with a tarp over it, seemingly one of those things is better than the other, and you're going to pick the one that's better than the other. Whether or not someone tells you, well, there's a bunch of racists over there, or that was built by slaves, that house was, is like, well, are slaves still there? It's like, no, there's no more slaves, but they did it once, and it's like, I think I'm gonna go live in that house because we're cool. But yeah, and then also pointing out like some of the things that just don't make sense or don't hold up under scrutiny this day and age is um, one of the like, well, up until recently when some things surfaced, but one of the like pillars of the immigrant and minority community, especially in California, is a guy named Cesar Chavez who fucking hated illegal immigrants, especially Mexican immigrants. If I understand this correctly, he came up with a very derogatory name for those illegal Mexicans. Not going to say it, but I don't have a problem saying it, but my internet presence disallows me to say that. I also
Well,
wrote down here Barry Gold. Go ahead.
I
I
was
got it
just going
wrote
to say
down. So go ahead.
real quick before I forget, though, pointing out how you're talking about, well, America, this is better than the other. Yes, we've done this. That's another part of the framing, though. It's like I don't have to defend my country. You don't go to Mongolia and you don't see Mongolians apologizing for Genghis Khan. No, you see them building 100+ foot statues to him. You go and
Hell
talk
yeah.
to the regular Turk in Turkey. They're not apologizing and lamenting over what the Ottoman Empire did. It is only
No, they're
Western
not.
the Western world that is expected to just roll over and say, "Oh, we're sorry for the British Empire. Oh, we're sorry for the American this," or "Oh, we're sorry about the Aborigines in Australia." And it's demented and it's just strange when you can say, I like how this is going in my country. If the practices and our traditions and whatnot. And if somebody doesn't like it, or why is it like that? It's like, well, because we live here. That is essentially it. That is it. In my travels across the world, I didn't think, it'd be great. We need to just go around sprinkling democracy and planting rainbow flags everywhere and just changing everybody up to how we do things. Now, of course, our politicians and the powers that be, they want to do that. And that, rolls into this idea of a faceless, blobless, nationalism is bad. And going back to the post World War II consensus, that has been the message hammered over and over and over. And that's why after a while that's why you see these countries, these nations just cowed and apologizing for things. And you're thinking to yourself, why? What has it gotten us? Where is it? Because the biggest thing is that just breeds more resentment. And you think you're doing more for people. No, they resent you for it because it doesn't matter, because they still see the image of the superiority of the civilization. That's what it is. And we need to be unapologetic about it. It doesn't mean that, of course, pogroms and genocides need to pop out left and right. No, but there needs to be more
Sure.
of an assertion that who we are is who we are. Just just as Samuel P. Huntington, the writer, Who Are We? That book came out, I believe, in 2004. And he talked about the American identity. And nowadays, the phrase is America's just an idea. And when you take it to the logical extreme, like,
Right.
well, okay, if America's just an idea, we have a lot of people here who don't believe in any of these ideas. So they should go, right? But then that just stops them in their tracks because they're going, well, no, wait a minute. That doesn't mean that we need to denaturalize people. That doesn't mean that we need to, shore up our society for people who actually believe in these ideas. And so it's kind of interesting to me how these platitudes of, well, this is an idea, and that that constitution, those pieces of paper, what was written on the page, that's what unites us. Okay, well, Liberia, the, the nation in Africa that got started after the Civil War, which had a capital named Monrovia after James Monroe. They started out with the Constitution as well. Just, they didn't have whiteout back then, but it was pretty much whited out America and just put in Liberia. It didn't work. Some of these ideas are ideas. It comes from the people, and you change it. Demographics, cliche, but demographics is destiny. And you change up the people, you're going to change up the societies, and these supposed laws that protect us. There's already talk of, well, that needs to change, or no, we don't like it like that, or according to our custom and our culture and our beliefs here, this needs to change there. And you're thinking, no. And it's just amazing that more people don't see it. That it's sometimes considered derogatory to call it normies or grillers, but it's just the people that they don't have time, like me and you, Rudy. They don't, and many of us, to focus on these issues, to look into it, to do the research, and to see how we've gotten to this point. And almost as if they just kind of like, say you have a hole in the floor in your bathroom, but it's not that big, and eventually it just keeps on growing because there's a leak. But you just keep using that restroom, the bathroom, for everything, and after a while you just put a rug over it, and you start making excuses yourself. You start saying, well, no, it's fine, we don't go out shopping, we have the drop off. Walmart drops everything off, so we don't even have to go into town. Or, yeah, we used to go downtown, but it's gotten a little sketchy, so we don't go there anymore. And it's just making these
Right.
just adjustments in life to stay comfortable. And that's not going to work forever. It's definitely not going to work as more and more people are just coming here. It's not here to be an American, or to even believe in anything. It's here because there's salt, there's sugar out. So there's gimmies. I mean, come on, we've seen
It's
over just
parasitic.
yeah. This is nothing organic about it at all. Just back to the Hart-Celler Act of them promising that this is not going to change up any ethnic makeups. It has. Just look at the numbers. There's real changes that come with that, and to keep telling yourself that it's just going to keep going the way it's going. That's not the case. There's going to be more conflicts, more collusions, just more strife, essentially.
Yeah, it's you can kind of the metaphor I wrote down was, you know, whether it's the United States or Western civilization, but the United States more broadly, it's like if you think about like the United States Marine Corps commercials, they will show like battle and combat and, rifles and things like that. And they might show like historical footage of World War II, Iwo Jima raising the flag, but they always seem to end with the dress blues and the goddamn saber, right? So it's like, that's what it is. That's the shining example. That's what you can be. You can look like that. This is an elite club. We're the best. We're the elite. Come join us. Is it going to be tough? Is it always going to be rainbows and butterflies? Nope. But this is the shining beacon. And then they throw up the saber on the shoulder. And when you're, 15, 16 years old and an American male, you look at that and like, damn. Especially if you don't have a whole lot going for you. I never joined the Marines, but I was this fucking close to doing it. But you see that, and that doesn't, when you see that, you're not thinking about the My Lai massacre or anything like that. You kind of understand what the job is of a soldier, but you're not thinking about some of the, and I might be mixing this up. It may not have been Marines involved in that, but you understand kind of the point is like, they're not perfect, but it's something, and it's better than the alternative. And it's this thing, it's a shining example. And, the other thing I have here is I have to bring up Barry Goldwater, because Barry Goldwater, first of all, basically the father of at least modern conservatism, which they've completely strayed from. But he also, I have to point out too, you mentioned the Civil Rights Act, and yeah, it might have been signed by Lyndon Johnson, but it was passed by Republicans. That was their like thing. That was their bill. And this is also kind of an inflection point and a turning point of Black America as well, who used to vote pretty hardcore Republican. And then after the Civil Rights Act, you started to see that those numbers started to then shift to Democrat. Now, is it because of that legislation? Not necessarily, but it had a lot to do with it, even though Republicans, championed it. Barry Goldwater was against it. And Barry Goldwater knew what was coming. It cost him, he then runs in an election, which everyone forgets about because he got absolutely destroyed. But his whole thing was the reason he's not, people will castigate Barry Goldwater and say, well, he was a racist. He wouldn't even vote for the Civil Rights Act. Well, if I remember correctly, I don't believe even Martin Luther King Jr. was for the Civil Rights Act. And Barry Goldwater's point was, we could just live up to the words of the Constitution. It's already there. It's already written that you cannot discriminate based on, race, religion, creed, blah, blah, blah. Like it's all in there. I'm not to blah, 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 yada, yada, the Constitution. But you get my point here of like, you could just live up to what the founders laid out. Like that's on the table. You don't have to pass the sweeping legislation that then undermines the system and creates a whole another subsystem that then overtakes the actual Constitution. And of course, he paid the price for that. And one of the things that you pointed out was like the family thing. The family thing, I think, is the back door I think this was the point the whole time for those who were for this immigration bill, because I don't know if I've told the story here on this podcast before. If I have, well, plug your ears because I'm going to tell it again. But last year, I went to a work outing convention thing in Knoxville, Tennessee. And we stayed in downtown Knoxville. First time I've ever been to Tennessee, I think, in general. Beautiful place, cool city, cool town. No complaints about Knoxville or Tennessee or anything like that. Had a great time. We stayed at a hotel downtown on Gay Street, of all places, which is like, well, just like, the seventh grader in me got a good kick out of that. But anyway, so we're in the really nice hotel. Great place. And or very nice, not really. I understand when I say really nice. People think, I'm not rich. Okay, spend it all on the shit behind me. Anyway, so we're in the hotel and we get on the elevator, and I'm the guy who finds like the weird thing that no one else is looking at, and what I see is like the use permit or something to that nature. So it's like an official city document where you got to pay to operate this. I guess actually it was to operate the elevator. Well, it has all the particulars of this is the name of the LLC and this is the owner and blah, blah, blah. And I'll be goddamned, what do I see on there? But it was the owner, last name Patel. Okay. Anybody who stayed in hotels in the last decade, probably 2 decades, is going to understand what I mean when I say the last name Patel on a hotel. Okay. I'm not sure how all of these Patels got here, but I'm pretty sure I know without having the evidence of how all of these Patels got here. And here's the thing. There's a documentary that's out there that's like called The Life of Patel or something like that, where there are like Patel reunions, and it is like thousands of people that show up all with the last name Patel, and this reunion happens in the United States. So like Kash Patel is probably related to every hotel owner with the last name Patel somewhere down the line. Okay, and I don't mean down the line like Jones or Smith. I mean like 2 degrees separation, possibly 3, from those 2 Patels. So this is the H-1B visa program at work. This is what it got us. It didn't get us the brightest minds who reverse engineered the nuclear power plants we set up in India and made nuclear weapons out of them. It didn't get us those guys. It got us 1 or 2 decent, engineers or scientists or possibly doctors, although I never thought we had a doctor problem in the United States. It's getting a whole bunch of guys working in hotels as janitors, and this is the educated professional class that we had to import because Americans can't mop a fucking floor. Like this whole thing is a complete it's completely broken. I'm not really sure how we even fix it, but everything, it's just it's the whole post World War II narrative of everything we were told was a lie. And to get back to the point of the guy Richard Wright on Tucker Carlson talking about, we're watching this whole thing fail in front of us, and you don't have to look any further than, I believe it was Virginia that just recently had a I can't remember if it was a bus or a semi, but a giant bus of some sort, in which the guy killed a family of four, I believe, by just basically driving right into them, killed them all. And then when the police show up, the guy cannot speak English whatsoever. And again, I don't hate to go back to Tucker Carlson. He had a guy, I think, end of last week, who's a former trucker turned author. He's on Substack, and the guy would been a trucker 20, 30 years, so he knows his shit. And he talks about how there used to be like an English, equivalency to, you had to be able to read and write English, understand English to be a trucker, and especially a long haul trucker that was part of like your CDL, and that went away. And so now you have a whole bunch of dots rolling around who can't read English, which is kind of crucial when all of our street signs are in English, all of the warning signs are in English, all of these snow chain warnings are in English, and they don't know these things, and they're killing people. They're piloting a 50 to 80,000 pound vehicle, depending on the load, down the road anywhere between 60 to 70 miles an hour, and they can't read a sign that says bridge out or construction or any of these things. And there's no shortage of dash cam videos from the trucks themselves, from the other vehicles on the road, of watching these guys just literally drive into stopped traffic. It's obvious it's stopped. They drive right into it because they don't understand that they're in a construction zone or a merge or this or that. We had one couple 3 years ago, not too far away in the Tulsa area there's footage of it from a tower cam or something of that nature. It's actually really good footage, as horrific as it is. But there's this is at like 4:30 in the morning. There's no one really on the road. It's a highway. It's a 6-lane highway, so there's plenty of places to go. And it's a UPS truck with 2 trailers on it that has some sort of malfunction. It can't pull the hill. The flashers are on. You see the flashers. It's still dark at 4:30 in the morning. You see the flashers on. He's off on the right lane, and out of nowhere, here comes a semi at 60, 70 miles an hour and just smokes the back end of that. Instant flames, instant fire. Come to find out, it was 2 dots inside of that semi who just drove right into a basically stopped giant truck with its flashers on, when there was they didn't have to drive into them. There was there's 2 other lanes open, and they just smoked right into that and killed themselves. And it's just like, it comes back to the whole bleeding heart thing of like, oh, these poor immigrants, they can't, they're seeking asylum for persecution. And that's another scam of they're being persecuted for their faith or their this or that. And, they have their ceremonial dagger on them. So they got to come here. And it's like, if you really cared about these people, if you really cared, you would absolutely make sure they knew how to drive the truck, how to read the street signs and the construction signs and all of those things. But no, you don't really care about them. You just, for some reason, you're insulated from how this happens, how this goes down. You're, the old school bleeding heart liberal, whatever it is. You're completely insulated from the decisions you make, or again, you're just, carrying water for Koch brothers and the like, who just need cheap immigrant labor to pad their bottom line. That way, the GDP goes up. And the GDP means everything. As Pam Bondi said, the Dow's over 50 grand. And then the GDP went under 50 grand or 50,000, and she got whacked, which I thought was hilarious. But now it's back up. And now, of course, every regime, whether it's Republican, Democrat, or other, talks about how, well, the Dow is up. The Dow is this. The Dow is that. All the while, we sit here going, wow, here in Oklahoma, where we have oil and gas is very prevalent, we have some of the cheapest gas in America generally. I've never paid more than $4 per gallon for gas. I have now. And now today it was at $3.77, I think is what it was, $3.71, something like that. That is absolutely ridiculous for this part of the world. Diesel, add another dollar to that. So the cost of goods keep going up, but our GDP is up. Our job numbers are supposedly up, but inflation still up, gas still up. I don't know if you saw, I won't get into that. That's a whole nother subject. But this whole thing is just completely falling in on its face. And I guess we just get to enjoy this. I don't know.
Yeah, and for the listeners, Rudy's talking about Gord McGill, and his book just came out not too long ago, End of the Road, Inside the War on Truckers. And he also writes a
Great
great
guy.
Substack, Autonomous Truckers. And I'm not only saying that because he's my mutual and he recommends my Substack. No, he's a great guy. He did a great interview with Tucker. He's been
It's fantastic.
talking about these issues for quite some time. Back to what you said about the Patel cartel, essentially,
Nice.
what amazes me is the lies we live by. Well, these immigrants, the GDP go up, and look at their how much they make, look at their per capita, look how industrious they are. Well, also look at how they do these things, and you
Yes.
cannot match it up with quote unquote a Native American. There was a book called Life Behind the Lobby: Indian American Motel Owners and the American Dream by Pawan Dingra, and it just lays out. I mean, it's so funny they write these books, or that they do, online is always talking about. They just kind of expose themselves, because you read the book and it's just step by step how they increased the immigration, how they took over hotel after hotel, how they colluded with each other, the in-group preference, the nepotism and whatnot, things that an American cannot do. The hammer will
Right.
come down on you. You don't have those special pipelines for that small business loan. You don't fall into that category of protected minority, even though the person who does comes from a nation of 1.3 billion plus. It's
Right.
insanity. It cannot continue. And back to the trucker point, I know JD Vance has been posted online, especially on X, Twitter, however you want to call it these days, Twitter, of we're doing the corruption thing, and I'm trying to sound the alarm here. Like, have you gone to Fresno yet? Have you looked into those trucking schools? Have you looked into the trade schools? Because on the ground here, we can see it. People see what is actually going on, but it doesn't. Things don't change. I mean, as you brought up earlier, Rudy, about how well they're doing the jobs that Americans just won't do, and you get the politicians talking about well, e-verify, or this program or that program. I have a coworker. His wife used to work in the vineyards over in Paso Robles along the coast, and she distinctly remembers and would talk about how the workers would come in there, and at times she would have to give them back the paperwork saying you're missing a few digits from the social security number. Flat out knew that these were not on the up and up, on board, actual workers, actual citizens, Americans at all whatsoever. But the catch 22 on that is they are not allowed to say anything, apparently, because then that falls under federal. And so you can't even say anything. You'll get in trouble by that company. And it's by design.
Right.
It's uh, earlier when we started, and you talked about how, going into Minneapolis, and all the hit and bang ice stuff, and you know our opinions may differ. I wanted it to go a bit harder and not let up a bit. Okay, maybe change a few things, but the momentum just fell out. The gas, the air went out of the room there. But what we haven't seen at all, we've seen executive orders from the administration. We have seen some good things on that front of cutting back on illegal immigration and whatnot. And yes, the border is closed, but it's systemic. You're not going to get the uniparty politicians to actually come together and go against their donor class. They're not going to go against the business interests. Oh Lord, no, not at all. And as you discussed with the truckers who can't even speak English, and that, I mean, that should be about as basic as it gets. These are on our highways. Our families travel these roads. Other people's, everybody uses them, and it almost feels it's practically weekly. Another incident. You see the dash
Yep.
cam footage, and you're going, when did the American trucking industry in itself have to be replaced? You know, the movie came out before I was even born, but growing up, yeah, watching Smokey and the Bandit, knowing
Hell
some
yeah.
family members that were in the trucking industries, it was a good middle class blue collar job there, and it worked. But then until it didn't. just not said is, they talk about, say, chicken farms in Georgia, and they'll come up with the whole platitudes of, well, these are just jobs that, Americans won't do, and it's dangerous, it's dirty, blah, blah, blah. But then, you pull the layers back, you do your own research, you look into it, and you're going, wait a minute, actually, Georgians were doing these jobs in the 90s. Oh, but then they wanted better working conditions. They wanted a little bit more money. They started mobilizing, and then, oh, they all got laid off, and then the Guatemalans show up. It's like this was a process. This was intentional. This has been done to us, and more need to acknowledge it and see it for what it is. Like, this is replacement. This is, for all the talk of how AI is going to do all these wonderful things. Why are all these guys building the doomsday bunkers in New Zealand? Why are they not building here? I made a post not too long ago that I think Walter Kern, he had put one up about how, look at these billionaires, look at these people, that group. What have they done for America? They talk about the data centers, they talk about all these things, but they're not building things here. They're not building their estates here. They're going off out of the country. And I noted how, for all their flaws, Carnegie Hall, Rockefeller, the other titans of industry back in the
Right.
day, they built stuff here though, libraries, it's just institutions and whatnot. I mean, of course, we hear, the horrible capitalist, and yes, there's plenty of things we can quibble with there and look back on, like, yeah, glad that changed, but they were Americans, and they, for the most part, invested in America. Quick tangent on that, Henry Ford. Go ahead and look up Dodge versus Ford. See what that court case was
Yeah.
about. Go see where Ford had the 40-hour work week, and certain pays and allowances for the workers. And, oh, the Dodge brothers, we can't have that. No, your number one job is to increase shareholder value. That is all it is. We are not USA. We are GDP. That dividend has to go up, and that is in law, written law. Like, that is the entire purpose of it all. And it's just amazing to me about how, we've got technology, we've got these little wonder kinds, and is it a better country? Is it still our country? Not when you go to Costco, not when you see basically it looks like a UN convention. And, the biggest worry to me is, we're going to have declines. There's going to be more recessions. They're cyclic. There's going to be upheaval. And without any community bonds here, without something actually connecting us, what's going to happen? We look back to the Great Depression, and many of us have family members back, that lived through that years ago, and would tell the stories. And then I mean, my great grandfather tipped his hat to black eyed peas, the plants, because kept him alive. But in that time, for the most part, people pulled together. If you needed a meal, you go to your neighbor and stuff. And nowadays, you walk into, just for example, you walk into a gas station, there's your Bluetooth American talking to who knows who, doesn't say good morning to you. What is it? What are his ties to the community? What happens when there's a
None.
downturn? I wrote in one essay, a little piece there about it's a thought experiment. But if we do actually went through a Great Depression 2.0, and we're talking the benefits drop and it becomes, a hand to mouth for a while, the only silver lining to that is the people who stay here and don't go to their home are the Americans, because this is our home. All these folks talking about, well, yeah, I'm going to be an expat. I'm going to go to Costa Rica. I'm going to go here and there. I look down on them. I'm going, then you were never, this is not yours. Then you have no ownership. You have no claim to it. Then, if you're just ready just to escape, just like the billionaires look to do, and they're just going to leave us with the bag. But once again, the silver lining will be the people left will be American, because this is their home.
Yeah. To that point, so there's one statistic that I wrote down for this episode was for fiscal year 2024, 71% of H-1B visas were from India. And, I'm not plugged into the Indian community, but I'm going to suffice it to say that the vast majority of them are not splitting atoms. Let's just put it that way. Um, I do want to point out that, one of the things that Daryl Cooper recently pointed out that, to your point about like Carnegie, Rockefeller, etc. One of the things he recently pointed out was that one of the like guardrails of the um, American culture on its like, at its in within politics and within the like broader America is that the WASP community is like gone now. The Rockefellers are basically, I'm sure some of them still exist. They don't matter. You can look to, same thing with Carnegie's, Vanderbilt's, you know, these titans of industry who built this country, who invested in this country, and who then became, donated so many different things from libraries to plazas to research facilities, any number of things. They invested their money into this country. One, they had so much of it, but two, they were trying, it's a bunch of rich guys trying to outdo each other in philanthropy, and then that benefits the plebes, if you will. That benefits the common man, and that is fantastic. But that doesn't really exist anymore. And where it does kind of exist is, it used to exist in universities, but now, because everyone might have some sort of checkered past where they said colored person instead of person of color, whoa, we can't have that, so we got to take his name off of the building. And so that stuff is being kind of undermined and cut away. And if universities suffer, well then, I put a smile on my face. But those kind of like societal guardrails, I guess, the cultural guardrails, or at least the avant-garde of that has gone away. There is no like beacon of light, no lighthouse that takes us in a certain direction and that moves it forward. Their heirs basically just dropped the ball and said, well, we're just gonna be fat and happy or whatever. But I do want to point out, like, the Asian community, the Asian community in this country, Asian communities, whatever, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, but really like Japanese, Chinese, they go back hundreds of years in this country. So they have long lineages that are heritage American. But the thing about like the Japanese culture in America, okay, yes, there was a Japanese internment camps, Japanese American internment camps for World War II. Not a good thing. But those people did not really hold that against the United States. Their sons went and signed up to fight for the United States against the Germans, the Japanese, and what have you. And those people, so one of the like, kind of cultural reference points, if you will, is the original Karate Kid movie. And when you ask people who've seen the movie, what did Mr. Miyagi do? Like, what was his job? Most people don't know, but he was basically a gardener. And he was a representation of an actual, like, swath of person in America, where, especially from what I understand in California, the West Coast, of Japanese gardeners. And the Japanese gardeners went away not because a whole bunch of Hispanics came in, but because they said, I'm going to work my ass off. My kids are going to go to college, or at least I'm going to leave a nest egg or something. They're going to do better than me. And it wasn't like, I hope they do better than me. It was, no, you're going to do better than me. And now you have Asian communities which are thriving, and they're super pro-American. I've never met an Asian person who was like, yeah, fuck your country. It's nothing. Any Asian that I've ever met that has come here is grateful, whether that's Hmong people, whether that is Korean, whether that is Chinese, whether that's Japanese, any of the actual Asians, on the good side of the Himalayas, if you will, those Asians absolutely love this country. There's a guy in the small town that I live in that's got his own little restaurant, and he's got all kinds of like Trump shit. Well, he used to have it. I haven't been in there in a while. He might have took it down. He might have been as disappointed as I am, but the dude is stars and stripes all the way. He's had kids here. He loves that they're Americans. He doesn't give a shit about Vietnam, I think is where he's from. Some might have been Laos. I can't remember. yeah, he's got family over there. He loves his family, but he's a full-blown American. He's not talking trash on it. He absolutely loves it. He loves that his kids are American, and that really becomes like the delineation here of like, yes, there is good immigration. There are good immigrants. Someone who comes here, starts a business, and now is, a productive member of society. They're bought into the system. Yeah, they don't look like me. They don't look like anyone, my family. But as far as like the way that they act, behave, expectations, things that they do, they're Americans. There's black people that don't look like me. I hate to, bust the bubble of people who don't see the video, but I am not black.
I'm shocked.
But breaking news,
Breaking
Rudy's
news.
not black. But there are plenty of black people, black Americans, or just Americans that do the same thing. They go to work, they pay their taxes, they vote, they shoot guns, they do whatever. And some of them raise cattle, some of them are cowboys, some of them are, titans of industry. Well, I don't know really titans of industry, but some of them are executives within companies, and they're Americans, and they don't talk down about this country. They don't constantly bring up the Tulsa race riot, which now we have to apparently rename the Tulsa Race Massacre, which, by the way, the celebration of that, which is odd to say, happens, I think, a week from tomorrow, maybe 2 weeks from tomorrow. And there's enhanced security, but that's neither here nor there. These are truly Americans, and you can come here and you can be an American, but to come here and to, as you have pointed out numerous times, the Bluetooth person who has no ties here, who's wearing open-toed shoes in a environment that serves food and doesn't give a shit about this country, could care less to learn the language. Same thing with with the business that I'm in. I get, I have to interact with the public. A lot of that is through like online forums and whatnot. The idea that I'm in sales, and so the idea that someone, messages my business to ask about anything and the message is completely in Spanish is offensive to me. And I'm not a guy who gets offended. But the idea that you're here in this country and you're trying to purchase a product in which I sell, and you say your first interaction is 100% in Spanish is offensive to me, because I would never go to China, and first of all, I wouldn't go to any country that didn't speak English. Go there, may or may not be illegal, but I would never go there and on a day-to-day basis expect, Hans and Franz in Berlin to speak English. That I would find that to be just, first of all, I would be embarrassed. But to try to conduct business on just a person to person, we're not talking about international business and takeover. We're talking about, person to person business, like buying a car or something, and to just be like, what do you mean you don't speak English, Hans? Seems like I would be in the wrong there. I find it highly offensive that we have and this happens regularly, where I get the full blown Spanish, whatever, I don't know what the fuck it says because I don't speak Spanish. To me, the arrogance of that, I don't know, maybe I should have a little bit of sympathy for that person because they have this arrogance that they can just expect me to cater to their foreign language. But that's kind of my whole thing, is like, if I when the ICE thing was happening, when it was like full bore and it was on the news, there were a lot of people in my kind of outer orbit who have green cards, and they have friends who were like iffy on the green cards or whatnot, who were like literally concerned that they might get scooped up. And I had to just sit there biting my tongue and thinking in my head, good. Because if you're not on the up and up, you should be a little concerned. Maybe you should take care of that. Maybe after being here for 20 years, perhaps you go and become a citizen instead of suckling on the teat of the taxpayers. None of them got picked up, unfortunately. So,
I mean, this might sound like a bit of a pushback, but I'm not here to glaze all of the great immigrants that are here. Because once again, my nation is not here to cater to the rest of the world. It was not meant for that.
Sure.
It goes back to the Hart-Celler Act. Senator Irvin out of North Carolina, he objected to, and as he quoted out, the rights for Ethiopians, as for people from England, France, Germany, or Holland. He said, with all due respect to Ethiopia, I don't know of any contributions that Ethiopia has made to the making of America. He favored preferences for groups with the greatest influence in building the nation and saw the national origin system as a benign mirror reflecting the United States. And this just kind of goes back to the H-1B program, which was started in 1990 under Republican George Bush. And going back to what I talked about, the kind of two sides of the coin for technology. What is great about that is you can go and look up what they said at the time and how it was explained. And the revolving door logic of in 1990, the discussions and debates around this, you had these statesmen talking about this is not to replace anyone. This is one of those, hard to fill jobs in,
Right.
say, Nebraska, like a rural city, a rural town clinic needs a doctor that can be filled. And of course, what we've seen over the last few years of, oh, look, 7-Eleven needs janitors, H-1B. Oh, T-Mobile needs H-1B, H-1B for everybody. One of the greatest examples of this was, and I'm sure you remember this story that came out, Rudy. I believe it was 2014 or 15, when Disney just in one fell swoop got rid of how many of their software engineers, how many of their IT people, and they had
Right.
one of the stipulations was they needed to train their replacements or they would not get a severance, and also not supposed to talk about the great replacement of their jobs. Disney, supposed Walt Disney, American institution, American company, and
100%.
that's what H-1B did there. And it's just the revolving door logic, once again, is where it's going to now of, well, these are just jobs that we can't fill now. It's like, well, 30 something years ago, you said this was just, safe, legal, and rare, like Hillary Clinton would say. This was only going to
Right.
be for that one job hard to fill in Idaho or something like that. And no, it once again metastasized. Same thing as the Civil Rights Act saying how, well, this is just put people on equal footing. And you go back and see what they talked about then in the 60s about how, just within a generation or two, you're going to have people, on the same level. You're going to have just as many doctors of this group and just as many, professionals of that group. And then when that didn't happen, then it had to evolve once again to more justifications of, well, this is diversity. You've got to have a diverse group here. And it's just amazing to me that, you look at the accomplishments that our nation has done, and I'm not going to get into the whole moon landing controversy. I'm just saying though, but you look at those pictures, we didn't need diversity. We didn't need Nigerian, engineers to do it. We had the people here. And just to see the numbers continue, line go up, whether it's GDP or population, and we're all just supposed to say everything is awesome and this is wonderful, even though Americans are adjusting their lives to it and telling whatever they have to tell themselves to just pretend it's not happening. And that's just what amazes me. I am happy that we can actually have these conversations that, Buchanan got ran out of town in 2011 off the airwaves. But the younger generations, they're starting to read the words of the past, the predicators of this, the Pat Buchanans, the Joe Sobrins, the Sam Francis, the Samuel P. Huntingtons, and going, you know what? Maybe they had a good idea there, or maybe they saw some things because we're seeing the fruits of this. We're seeing no starter homes for Americans. We're seeing outrageous rents, and it does come down to we have too many people here, and it's just amazing to me that you see how much of a racket it truly is. Like, how many 7-Elevens shut down after they corralled and tightened up the rules for SNAP EBT? What were they shut down? I know it was over 100 plus,
There's a
and you saw
lot.
that. You see that as a racket. You're going, how much just grift and fraud? I mean, what is America here for? Just be the blessings for everyone here? No, it should be here for Americans, and I unapologetically say that America is for Americans. Now, does that mean that there's this, we're going to have some mythical ethno state? No, there's always other people, but the numbers don't lie when you see 88%, 90+%. And then within less than half a century, it's down to what they tell us right now. Oh, no, you're still 70% of this nation. No, we're less than that. Drive around and find out. And the brutal truth is you have to have a majority ethnic population in a country to keep the institutions going, to keep the guardrails on how you live your life. It's just as if look at Japan. Japan is Western adjacent to us. I've been there many times. I love Japan. Did you see what their what issues they're having right now around the shrines and certain other areas?
I haven't.
Copper's getting stolen, piping is getting
Oh
stolen.
God.
That's not Japanese doing that.
No,
That
no,
is,
it's
that
not.
is the magical immigrants that are coming in, and yeah, I don't want that in my nation. I don't like what I see in my nation. I mean,
Yeah.
and it
To, to,
they
to
can call us
that,
all names for not liking it, but it is what it is. We're kind of past that point where okay, you've called me that or whatever you want to call me. Now what? What
yeah,
happens next?
that's right, and that's one of the things. So, like to the Disney's point, like how'd that work out for him? How's Disney doing? My my point, and I sidetracked myself with the talking about the Asians and kind of their integration into becoming heritage Americans at a certain point, is because the like Peter Thiel announced he was going to move to Argentina. So you have this, and I know he's not a heritage American; he's German born, and I guess is an American citizen or was or whatever.
I think
But
he's a
you
cyborg,
know,
but yeah,
what he's a piece of shit is what he is.
yeah.
But the thing is like Peter Thiel is the epitome of that. Of like he has no allegiance to Germany or the German culture or the German anything. He has no allegiance to the United States and American culture, even though he's like integral in the like ruination of it. But he is like he's the epitome of that elite immune from the decisions and the choices that they make because they don't have any sort of like ideals or sacred cows if you will they don't have any like they're not bought into anything except apparently power money business what have you because when you can just say well I'm just going to pick up and leave like to your point earlier like if you have this kind of breakdown of the system and the payouts stop happening. I'm not going anywhere. I don't have anywhere to go. Like this is my home. There's not a secondary option. I had a grandmother that was, she immigrated post World War II from Germany. I mean, she was a full-blooded German. She's since passed, but she was full-blooded German. Like, and so I have like, relatives over there that are, pretty direct line blood relatives of mine, which I've never met. But here's the thing: if I'm not going to Germany, like it's not a second option. It is, if it comes down to like when I look at World War II or World War One or whatever, like despite the fine minutia or what have you, it's like, well, fuck you, Germany. You got what you had coming to you. Like that's kind of my feeling. It's like it comes down to us, but that was kind of my point with the whole Asian thing, and like there is this as I was explaining to my employee that I mentioned earlier. I was explaining to him, I think it might have been today. I said the trajectory that we're on, and I'm not even talking about like the Iran war, any wars, anything like that. I'm talking about domestically the trajectory that we are on within our political system, within our social system, within our cultural system is going to bring about a strong man, the likes of which will like make history just, I just, if you, as I said to him, if you think, and he doesn't think Donald Trump's bad, but I said, if those people who think Donald Trump is bad, he's going to look like a kitten next to the guy that comes down the pike because the trajectory that we're on, I don't know which side it goes. I don't know how it plays out. But if something kind of, incremental drastic changes don't happen, it's going to not only happen in the United States, it's going to happen in the United Kingdom. And the strong man that comes from those is hopefully will be very benevolent, but there's going to be a lot of bloodshed. There's going to be a lot of unrest, and it is going to be, somewhere in the neighborhood between like Stalin and Franco or somewhere in there. Because the things that we've been talking about tonight, we're not violent. Well, I guess I can't speak for you, Arthur, but like I'm not sitting here, loading up AR mags to go storm the Capitol or anything like that. Because my belief is the state has the monopoly on violence, and it's kind of the thing that they want is for a bunch of nutters to gather arms and think they can storm the Capitol. We kind of all saw that. There wasn't any arms, but we saw how that played out on January 6th some years ago. But there comes a point where if all other options are exhausted, I don't know what happens from here. I don't know where you go from here. There's very much the saying that is true that our heritage is rebellion in this country. That's not limited to the crown. Having King Charles come and speak at Congress, I wish somebody would have thrown a tomato at the piece of shit. I have nothing necessarily against King Charles other than you're the King of England. We rebelled against you and you're not allowed in the people's house. Unfortunately, they allowed that to happen. But I don't know. I'm kind of fearful of where this goes because what I don't see, if you look at if we say that the parallel between the UK to us is just like a couple of months or a couple of years politically, I look at the UK where no one on any party who has been elected and been in power for the last 20, 30 years has done anything that they said that they were going to do in regards to immigration. And the people now I'm not super familiar with British politics, but parties that basically were fringe, and some of them really are fringe. Like I think they have a Green Party, which is just literally like a bunch of crunchy hippies. They're starting to come up in the polls and gain a major portion of the voting percentage just because they're not the other guys, because they might actually do something. That's kind of the same trajectory that we're on. It's two wings of the same bird at this point. We can talk about Texas, and, there was a contentious primary for Texas Senate between Paxton and that other nameless piece of shit who can hopefully withers into oblivion. But
Thune. Yeah.
Yeah. No, Thune is in the Dakotas. Was Cornyn.
Oh, Cornyn. Sorry.
Cornyn was the guy.
Yeah, John
worthless John Cornyn.
Thune's worthless too, but yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, yeah. Two worthless old white guys. Here we go. Both of them, or if you take Cornyn, or you take Cornyn and Paxton, both of them were talking about the border. When I lived in Texas, 15 years ago, they were still talking about the fucking border. Ted Cruz has been talking about the border. Hot Wheels has been talking about the border. Okay, these are issues that they campaign on, but they will never govern on. And that's where, I've pointed out before, the worst thing that ever happened to a lot of, conservatives was that Roe versus Wade got overturned because now they couldn't raise money on it. They couldn't get campaign donations based on that. That's why they always talk about gun rights and the Second Amendment and never actually do anything, because they act like they're this, they're the wall, the thin, retarded line between you and your guns going away. But they make all these little concessions here, but they didn't really do it. It's the same thing they do with spending. And the border is that same thing. They're never going to do anything about the border, period. And even though Trump shut down the border, it was just executive order. Nothing's codified into law. None of that. And now we're hearing talks about amnesty. We're hearing amnesty again. There is going to come, my whole point to this, there's going to come a time and a point where the American people, the heritage Americans, we can take so much. We can take our neighborhoods changing a little bit and we can move to the next neighborhood. And, okay, Joe Bob's convenience store is now owned by Hajib or whatever his name is. And he's an all right fella. He means well. And we can do that stuff. But when it is now, it's packaged with the, oh, no, 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 no. You're a piece of shit because you're a heritage American. You don't matter because your skin is white or your family's been here for 100 years or longer or whatever. You've got generational Americanism within your family. Look, you need to check your privilege, your American privilege, your white privilege, or whatever, because these people are underserved minorities and they are better than you because they come from a place that sucks. They had to flee this place and come here. And look, we owe it to them and you owe it to them because you have white skin, they have dark skin, and they have been oppressed. And that is our fault through colonialism or racism or slavery or God knows what other ism that they want to use. When you mix those things, and we're seeing this with the rise of a guy like Nick Fuentes into the, mainstream. I've mentioned it before. I've mentioned Nick Fuentes many, many times. I don't really consume his show. I don't consume his show at all. I don't even watch the clips anymore because they're all just dishonest. But I've heard him on other podcasts. The guy's talented. The guy has some, he can speak well. He can hold the conversation. He can do all of the things. He is he is a symptom of a bigger problem. And that problem, he's tapped into the frustrations of young people, the Gen Zs, and you see that not only with his rise, his popularity, but you're seeing that within if we can take this to the Thomas Massey primary and the way that the voting blocks broke down between that primary between Massey and Galrine, whatever his stupid name is. The young people, all on Thomas Massey's side. The boomer cons, all on the other idiot side. You can take all of the rhetoric out of it that doesn't even matter. Just look at the voting patterns and how they broke down based on age. The young people are coming. The boomers are dying and the young people are coming. And what comes behind that Gen Z could possibly be the people that lead the revolution of some sort. So,
Well, and I want to go back to something you said that was really interesting earlier. Circle back to it, how you discussed, you're not stocking up the bunker, getting ready to do things. I'm not doing that either. But that hits on the point here of why we're having these live streams, why we write essays, why are we just getting the message out? We are the moderates. And the problem with it is, as you point out, with Fuentes and other figures that have a following and young people attracted to that, it is not a good thing to have a nation with millions upon millions of people within that age bracket, late teens in their 20s, that can't buy a home, can't get a job, can't get married, can't form a family, get told all day long how evil they are. Everything was their fault. And we're the moderates. We're putting this out. We're not talking to the
right.
audience listener that is, in lockstep and understand kind of where we're at. I'm hoping that this gets to the normie. This gets to the guy who just wants to grill on the weekends and start looking at these politicians and notice they aren't on your side. A great example in your backyard is your governor, Republican Kevin Stitt. You know Stitt, right? Did you
I
happen to
do.
catch the NPR interview he
Oh, yeah.
did, where you might have even seen the post where I did on that because it was amazing. I listened to the show. Yes, my vices. I listen to the legacy media just to kind of pretty much know thy enemy, know what the opposition's saying. But this NPR article, the interview he did, was very interesting because something he said in that interview, and I went to the transcripts to npr.com, and it was not there, but he did say it, and I can't remember who the interviewer was at NPR.
Doesn't matter.
But he had, yeah, but it doesn't matter. The question was, he says, "What do you say?" Because they were talking immigration and the cultural changes and just
Mm-hmm.
changing makeup of Oklahoma itself. And he says, "What do you say to your constituents?" What was Oklahoma? It went for Trump by I don't know, 90% or something crazy. I mean, basically,
We have
totally.
not in a presidential election. There has not been one blue county
Yeah.
since 2008.
And the interviewer brought that up. He says, "What do you say to these constituents who voted for, the deportations and immigration restrictions and everything else? What do you say to those people who look around their community and they don't like the changes? They don't like how many different people have come in and have changed up how the community is going." And Governor Stitt says, "Well, they can just move. Ha ha ha." That's your Con Inc. Boomer Con, Republican, conservative in a redder than red state, telling his constituents, if you don't like this, you can just move. Well, there's not many more places left to move. People have been moving for the last 50 plus years to different places, and that has been the outlet. But we are getting to a point where there is nowhere to move, and you will have millions of young people who were shut out of opportunities because they weren't a protected minority or they didn't get that H-1B job, or just a number of factors there. Yeah, that's where you see the rise of the strong man. This whole thing about, oh, Trump, he's the red Caesar. No, he's not. He just bought time. This is the moderate option, and there is no legislation going forward. And all you continuously say is that Americans are the enemy. They are always the villain in these narratives and whatnot. And that's not true, but it can be. And I don't want it to go there. I don't think you do either, Rudy. I mean, we don't want our nation to burn burn to the ground to have to restart like some phoenix. We don't want to see. I don't want to see England have to do that. I don't want to see Europe have to do that, or New Zealand, or Australia, or Japan. And it's just amazing the cognitive dissonance by many who don't see the dangers of where we're at. I mean, the question of the 21st century, not only for America but pretty much for the world, is where do people belong? What is your identity? That's going to become more and more apparent. It's not to knock on you, but saying Asians, even that in itself is an erasure of peoples. I mean, Asia is not just Asia. You have Japanese, Okinawan, Koreans, you have Hmongs, you have Vietnamese. It's so many different countries with different cultures
Right.
and different ways of life that what was it that just happened with the Hmong guy? I don't know, up there in Wisconsin, another shooting, another ridiculous incident, and they chalk it up to, well, just the cultural differences. It's like, okay, well, we need to address that these cultural differences are becoming a noose around the neck of our nation. We're pretty much there, from whether it's Wisconsin, whether it's Minneapolis, California, Texas, now even these things are they're they're growing out of control, and there is going to be hopefully not, but a blow off point to this. I mean, I'm just imagining when the when the, well, for one, when the verdict comes out for was it the Carmelo guy? I mean, the
Oh
videos
yeah.
are going to surface eventually, and it's going to be worse than we even think, and it's going to go totally entirely against what the message is that's been going out about what happened, what didn't happen. But still, are we going to stay a nation of laws? Are we going to stay a nation of rules and whatnot? Not the way things are going. It is truly becoming the rule of man, not the rule of law. I mean, look at here in
Well, and
California, they still haven't even calculated the votes for the LA mayor. It's
it's
ridiculous.
ridiculous. It's I don't I lack the vocabulary to vocalize what's happening for Los Angeles mayor in that election or whatever. But you mentioned the Carmelo Anthony thing. Those are Americans. Like no one was imported. Like both of those, the victim and the perpetrator, both are Americans. So, when you start seeing this, um, you know, immigrant crime, if you will, whatever that means, it's just like it's at some point you can't outrun it when you have this like anarcho tyranny that's starting to appears to be starting to spread, not just from New York and other places, but when you have that spread to a red state, let's say, and now the person who defends themselves against the perpetrator because they were of a different color. I mean, look no further than George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. I mean, everybody wants to make it like it was some racial thing. Well, it obviously was not a racial thing. There was like three other officers, and most of them were like of Asian descent or something like that.
Who went to
And
jail
it's
as
like,
well.
sure, but like,
It's
I don't know,
crazy.
the historic, like, Asian black hate groups, or it's just like, it's so insane. But it's like, everybody was going to go to jail on that, because there's no way on planet Earth that any one of them, especially Derek Chauvin, could have gotten a fair trial. You could have held that trial on the fucking moon and he couldn't have got a fair trial. He had to go to jail because he had to be found guilty. Because if you're a juror, are you going to risk getting your house burned down, or your car burned down, or killed, or your family killed, or beat up, or anything else, by actually being impartial and saying, look, it was in the manual. He did nothing wrong. This guy was high on fentanyl and God knows what else. Not to mention he's a piece of shit trying to do another petty crime. Did he deserve to die? No. Did he find himself in a situation, put himself in a situation in which he ended up dead? Multiple situations that led to his death? Yes, he did. But you can't be impartial in that, because, again, the dynamics are against you. So if you just extrapolate that to like an illegal immigrant or whatever, I mean, there's no shortage of just take the semi out of it, of just drunken Hispanics driving into people and killing them with no license, drunk driving, smashing into people, maiming them, killing them, hurting them, destroying property, any number of things. And you take the what was the Abrego Garcia guy? I think he's still here. You're like, the courts are telling that the federal government, the executive branch, no, you can't deport this guy because we said so. So it's the two-tier justice system doesn't even begin to explain the anarcho tyranny that's happening, where good people, good, decent American people going about their days, the normies, which, I mentioned my employee before. I said that he was a normie. He took great offense to that. I said it's not a pejorative, but nevertheless, he was still kind of offended by it. But, the normies are the ones really getting hurt in this whole deal. And it's like, at some point you have to care about the citizenry. At some point you have to understand, like, this is an inflection point. These are things that are going to lead to bigger things. If a random, this is going to sound bad, but a random stabbing where someone dies is going to not really matter in the big scheme of things when you're talking about, like, I don't know, groups of armed men and women who go into places where there are a lot of these immigrants, who are raping the system, if you will, of benefits, quote unquote, and just gaming the system, and they go in there and they do something crazy. I I mean, obviously that's bad, but that's kind of where we're headed in the whole scheme of things. Like, uncovering the fraud and abuse of the Somali, the Leering Center, which has been such a big deal and such a just glaring example. Like, the whole reason that I brought up, like, the Asian immigration that came here and then basically assimilated, is because they don't do that. They don't come here and just parasite, leech off of the system. I'm sure there's a couple here or there, but like, their culture, the Japanese culture, is compatible with American and Western culture. That, for whatever reason, we get along. The Chinese culture may very well be compatible with Western culture. There's going to be slight variations in different things, because you're talking about a culture in China that's 2,000 plus years old. They have a historic culture. You say what you want about the CCP and the way they do things, not a big fan, but they do have a culture there.
Not a fan.
Fair enough.
Understatement.
Sure. But, okay, I agree with that. But then you have to ask yourself, too, do they have this problem of immigrants coming there, killing their citizens, and then people being like, well, what can we really do? we'll just let them go. Or, crazed homeless people hanging out on the streets and in their subways. I don't know if they have subways or train stations or any number of things going on there. Obviously, there's, a communist regime. There's going to be things that we're not fans of, but are the trains running on time? Are people relatively safe and secure in their homes and walking down the street? Like, would you be afraid to walk down the street of Beijing at midnight, let's say?
Well, no, I mean,
Uh,
and I've brought that up before that, in Japan, for instance, you're
sure.
just as safe at the subway at 1 p.m. as you are at 1 a.m. It is a civilization. It is a homogenous country. You don't have to agree with every way they do things, but it's their country and it's safe. And it is a culture of, respect, honor, and you don't bring shame onto things. And, for China, putting aside all the indelicacies of it or whatnot, everyone says, well, their leaders, they're communist and they just want freedom. Well, no, the people make the country. So that's what they're
Right.
going with. That's their country and that's how they run it. Is what it is. China for the Chinese, great, awesome. Japan for the Japanese. But as soon as you say America for the Americans, well, then you've just committed, a blood libel or something, a huge faux pas. Oh, how dare you say that? No, no, we're the Karl Popper Open Society. Well, even Popper said the paradox of tolerance is that you can't tolerate everything. And we just cannot continue to tolerate just being, the gateway for everyone to come here, start the scams, as you say, take opportunities away from Native Americans, and it's okay not to be happy with that. And it's also, as you brought up, a great point that the Carmelo Anthony and Metcalf, they were Americans. We already had problems here, so between Hart-Celler and just the whole multitude of supposed democratic processes of legislation for immigration, why would you pour gas on the fire here? We had enough things that we were trying to take care of as a nation itself. This did nothing for us, just caused more problems.
100%, and that's the last thing we need is more problems. Well, Arthur, my friend, we're over 2 hours at this point, so that's probably enough for now. Maybe we should leave the crowd wanting more next time, but
Right on.
we get going on these things. I'll put all the places that you can find Arthur on the Twitters, on Substack. There'll be links in the description. He has a very good Substack, very prominent, or prevalent, prominent, whatever. He actually adds to it a lot, whereas I am slacking on mine, so I don't even put it in my description. But you can find him on Twitter. You can find him on Substack. If there's anything else you want to throw out there as far as where they can find you?
No, you covered it all. Once again, thanks for having me on again. I always enjoy the conversations. And, at the end of the day, we got to keep having discussions, keep putting it out there. That's all we can do for now. I mean, so
Yep. I agree wholeheartedly. We'll keep these going. We'll try to make it maybe a little more regular. But anyway, in the meantime, everybody, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for commenting. Had some new folks hanging out, which I'm going to attribute to Arthur and his marketing of my podcast, which I appreciate. But everybody, have a great night. Have a great weekend. Don't do anything too crazy. And we'll see you next time. Peace.